You don't think Damian Lillard has the enough background to be the best point guard in the NBA? You don't think that?
No, I'm going by your definition of he has to be a two-way player.
But also,
why is Damian Lillard not a two-way player? Nobody would argue that.
Damian Lillard didn't have a big man all season long last year. Okay. And he
had Nurkic.
Nurkic actually came back in the middle of the season, right?
Second half of the season.
And
he brought him Melo.
Melo.
Carmelo
Anthony. We're talking about
as
Carmelo.
a third option. That was better than what Curry had.
Defense.
McCollum plays good two-way.
McCollum's not a good defender either. Their backcourt defensively is terrible. It's just that's why the Blazers aren't ever going anywhere.
And the Blazers don't have any size. They really didn't. Besides Nurkic coming back, that was the problem with the Portland Trailblazers all these years. They don't have enough depth or size. The last time they had good depth and size was when Marcus Camby played on the team. Okay, and that's a long time ago.
That's a deep cut. Yes. That was a deep pull.
Yes. To me, I look at the now again. I'm not going at I know a lot of Steph Curry fans.
I agree with you. I have no questions. Steph is great. We just have a difference of that. There's no question about that.
And I know he's great. We know he's one of the greatest, if not the greatest shooter we've ever seen. But again, when we're trying to compare him to the greatest point guards of all time, I can't sit here and I know. How old are you, by the way? I never asked.
40.
You're 40. I'm 39. So we're around the same age. So we've watched some of the great teams play, and we talk about the bad boy Pistons with Joe Dumars and obviously Isaiah Thomas.
One of the best point guards who doesn't get mentioned a lot. No. Listen, I'm not saying Steph's the best point guard in the history of the NBA.
Right. I know what
you're
saying.
He's in the top 5 conversation.
I can't.
Okay? Now you can go different ways. I don't have Jason Kidd in the top 5 point guards. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I just don't. It's not. He's not my guy. But this is the beauty of lists, right? Like we're all going to have different lists. Course, but I think automatically it tops when you talk to me point guards. I'm looking at Isaiah Thomas. I'm looking at Magic Johnson. Those are probably the top 2. John Stockton, phenomenal. I mean, there's no question. You said it from the beginning. Nobody's ever catching that assist record. Mm-hmm. Nobody's coming close to it. Right? Look how long Chris Paul has played, and he's still 3,000 assists away.
Right.
John Stockton deserves to be in that conversation. Like there's no arguing that stuff. But Steph's right in there with the conversation in 4-5 in that area. And now you're just quibbling over. Now we're going to smaller details. Now are you a Chris Paul guy or a Steph Curry guy or Jason Kidd or who else are we talking? And at the same time, are we going to include LeBron in this point guard conversation? Because that's the position he plays.
I think he's more of more like a 3, 4, 5 guy. I mean, he plays the point guard position in the playoffs. Yeah. In the playoffs, yes, he's the greatest point guard to ever play.
But it's so hard to do this, right? But like the more important thing is, we're lucky to get to watch all these guys. You and I are lucky for being able to see all these guys.
And Eric, by the way, I'm sorry to cut in. Eric is saying I'm in Never Neverland. Eric, it's your opinion. You're an idiot anyways. You don't even know what you're talking about half the time. I can bite you on the butt by you looking up numbers on a computer doesn't mean that you know more than I do. And honestly, when I watched basketball, which by the way, I've watched basketball. It's my favorite sport. Everybody that knows me on this show knows that I'm a basketball guru when it comes to that. To sit here and tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, you obviously don't know what you're talking about. Because I could go back in time without looking at statistics on a computer and tell you what the numbers were each year from each player. So what does that tell me about you? You don't crap. And you don't know anything about what you're comparing to when you're trying to compare one player to another. Because like you were saying, Mo, when you define the 80s, 90s, and today, the game is completely different. And when you look at the definition of players and understanding what players did in those times, if Steph Curry played in the 90s, he might not be the same player he once was because the game was different.
Not even close. Not even close. He wouldn't have been that guy. Mm-hmm. Plus they would have been way more physical with him.
Absolutely.
It's a whole different conversation, right? Like that's kind of what's funny about the top 75 list. Mm-hmm. I actually Amin Al-Hassan from Meadowlark Media, former ESPN guy, had the best thing. He said they should have done it by decades.
Right.
Should have been the top 10 in each decade, and then you have 5 wild cards. Because it is so wildly different, right? Like you listen, just on pure talent, you can't compare Bob Cousy to some of the guys playing now. just because the game's completely different, right? And everything that goes with it and all those things. So, when we're talking about it, and I'm just so glad you brought it up, just the 80s, 90s, 2000s to even now, basketball has changed on so many levels. If you told somebody in the 80s that we're going to have teams shooting 40 to 50 threes a game, they would have looked at you going like, no, that doesn't make any sense. You have to get closer to the basket for the shots. The three is just when we need it. This is when they're averaging just 2 threes a game.
Also the body types as well. Would LeBron be the same athletic freak he is playing in the 70s?
Yes, he would. Yes, he would.
LeBron could transcend.
Yes.
Just because look at that body.
His body's ridiculous.
But mentally, he's kind of weak.
Mentally, he's weak, but, if Shaquille O'Neal slams on the ground, he's going to slam Shaquille O'Neal in the 90s on the ground, too. He's just as big and strong as Shaquille O'Neal is. So that's the difference. LeBron James, you look at Steph Curry's body and you look at Michael Jordan's body. Who do you think, if Michael Jordan played in these days, Michael Jordan would be averaging 50, 60 points a game? He would, because he'd be at the line all the time, because he'd be fouling him and putting a finger on him. All right, he's at the foul line. Shoot to three shots at the foul line. I mean, seriously, it's ridiculous. The calls that they have right now, the referees are like little girls. If you put a finger on them, it's a flagrant foul. I remember when Shaquille O'Neal threw Charles Barkley into the third row of the seats.
Houston.
I mean,
now we know the origin of their feud.
And it wasn't even it wasn't a flagrant, it wasn't a technical foul. I mean, seriously, it was a foul. I mean, now you're thrown out of the game if you do something like that. It's ridiculous the way the NBA has changed and transformed. I wish the NBA was like it was in the 90s. It was much more fun to watch. It was more defensively sound, and they took away putting your hand on a player. I mean, now you got to use your body, you got to use your hip, you got to tear your. It doesn't make any sense. The game was just so much more fun to watch in the 90s and the 80s than it is today.
I'm gonna disagree about it being fun to watch in the 90s. It was funner in the 80s when it was up and down. The 90s became a very slow down, methodical.
You didn't like the 90s?
90s basketball wasn't very good. Like when you go back and watch it, which I did a whole bunch of that stuff during the pandemic, during quarantine, because I have a problem. I have a basketball problem. I have to watch basketball. So going through and watching those games,
NBA?
You had too many games. NBA. I'm not a college guy.
No, I'm saying basketball's anonymous. Do you need help?
Oh, I mean, yes, I do and I don't, because I'm not going to go. But yes, I'm not going to admit the problem. The bigger thing is you had too many games that are in like the 80s, right? In the system in the 90s and even the early 2000s. And here's the thing. I'm not a fan of the games being in the 130s and 140s, what we've been having the past few years. Kind of like where we're at right now with the rule changes that we've had so far this season. We've made it a little bit more physical. We've given defenses more chances to actually defend, which is something we didn't have over the last 5 years when offense just completely took over. I think we're getting back to that system of basketball that I think is going to be a lot more fun to watch just in that sense, because we're going to have games that more fun, more flow to it, and you're going to see defenses actually have a chance to, actually defend.
And here's another thing, and I see people putting on the feet now. A lot of people, and I've put my top 25 basketball players of all time. Oh. I see Eric putting.
Don't do this.
That I put. Let me speak and just shut up over there. I in my top 10, I never put Kobe Bryant because there's so many great basketball players, even of my time, that I never got a chance. Bill Russell's, Will Chamberlain's, all the great players that a lot of players never got it. Jerry West, nobody even watched him play. Pistol Pete, if there was a three-point line, he was the Steph Curry of that time. So when I go and I look back at some of the great basketball players in my top 10, I wouldn't put Kobe Bryant because there were so many dominant players. First of all, was Kobe Bryant the best two guard of all time? He wasn't. Michael Jordan was, okay? And then you have Tim Duncan, who was the best power forward. Some people would say Karl Malone was the best offensive player to ever play the game. I mean, then you have
another one you think is overrated.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I think he is, but that's all he did. He didn't play defense. Then Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he was a great two-way player and a great offensive player. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird. I mean, we could go off on everything. So Kobe Bryant might have been one of the best two guards and might have been one of the greatest players that we've seen in the last 20 years. But when you look at the last 60 years of the NBA and the greatest players of all time, I'm sorry, I'm not putting him in my top 10. Shaquille O'Neal, I could argue that he was the best center of all time. but I would put him over there. He was the most dominant player in 6 years. And by the way, he won the 3 MVPs when they won the title. It wasn't Kobe, it was him. Then when he left, Kobe won the championships with the team that he had, the different players that he played with. So, again, you have your opinion on what you think Kobe Bryant is, and I have my opinion. I don't think Kobe. I'm not saying Kobe Bryant is not one of the greatest 20 players of all time. He was. I can't take that away from him of what he was. But when I look at the greatest players of all time, I'm sorry, I'm not putting him in my top 10. And I'm sure other people would disagree, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree with me. I know 2 people that didn't put Kobe Bryant in their top 25.
They're idiots.
No, they're not.
Those 2 are out of their mind.
Really? Because you're a Kobe Bryant fan.
No.
That's what you are.
There's no way in hell Kobe's not a top 25 player.
That's your opinion. That's your opinion.
You could make the argument he's not top 10. Mm-hmm. I don't think you can make the argument he's not in the top 15.
That's fine.
But you can make the argument he's not in the top 10.
I put him 16 or 17 on my list. That's where I put him.
Okay. Well, again, and list again, totally subjective, right? It's all of us. Kind of everybody has their own stuff. But listen, if you value scoring, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar should be number 1, right? All-time scoring leader. Everything, nobody's touching that record. I mean, LeBron's going to come close, but I don't think he's going to get to it. Karl Malone certainly tried, didn't get to it. Mm-hmm. You have so many other guys. Just looking down, everybody you name, all have a case to be in the top 10. Mm-hmm. There's no arguing that stuff. It's not. It's what I love about it is the league is so damn good. Mm-hmm. That we actually have too many people for those spots, of right? Course, sometimes when somebody talks to me going like, name your top 10, I go like, I can, but I have like 25 guys for the 10, and on a different day in a different mood, I might have somebody else somewhere else, in the rankings and things like that. Kobe, I have him in the top 15. I try to stay away from this whole exercise anyways, because it goes back to what we were saying before. Eras are just so different. And the game is so different each decade and each kind of era that it's hard to just kind of compare those two. And I'm just not smart enough to do it. Others maybe. I'm not that guy.
I have Kobe. I think I had Kobe at 16 or 17. Yeah, that's where I had him. And it's right on the cusp of 15. I look at the greatest, even I never saw Bill Russell play, but I heard about what Bill Russell did with the Celtics. I never really got to see some of these guys play, but I seen Larry Bird play at the top of his game. He was unbelievable. Magic Johnson, unbelievable. We forget some of the great players. David Robertson, when he was at the top of the game, he was special. I mean, there were a lot of special players in the league. So when I look at the greatest basketball players of all time, I'm sorry I'm not putting Kobe Bryant in the top 10. That doesn't mean that I won't put him in my top 20. He was in my top 20. So where did I put Curry? Of all time, 10. You want to put him at point guards? I put him at 10 because I'll take 9 guys over Steph Curry at my point guard. You want to know, Eric, where I think he is? I look him at 10 or 11 of greatest point guards of all time. I look at other point guards. I want to see the greatest. When I look at point guards, I want to see two-way basketball. I want to see a guy that could shoot and make everybody around him better. That's where I look at the point guard position. Point guard is the guy that passes the ball, and he's the admiral. He's the guy that's a leader on the court.
No, David Robinson's the admiral.
So you should love Rondo then.
What do you mean?
Because Rondo does all of that.
I like Rondo, but Rondo as his all-around game, Rondo is not even close to the top 30.
I understand. But everything you just described is Rajon Rondo.
But here's the problem with Rajon Rondo. Rajon Rondo had a problem with his offensive game. He didn't have an offensive game. He was a great defensive player, great passer, great rebounder for a guy his size, didn't have an offensive game. And when you look at
He made everybody around him better.
That's right, but he didn't have an offensive. If Rondo scored 20-something points a game, Rondo's one of the greatest point guards to ever play the game. But he's not.
He's still one of the greatest point guards I think to ever play.
No, he's not.
He's not going to be thought of as
top 15.
He's not going to be.
No, he's not.
No, he's not going to be thought of as top
15. Rondo, Rajon Rondo.
I think so.
He's not even a Hall of Famer. He's not
Rondo's absolutely a Hall of Famer.
No, he's not. Mo, is Rondo a Hall of Famer?
Everybody's a Hall of Famer in the NBA. Our standards are so low in the NBA.
That's true.
Basketball,
basketball.
I might make it as a Hall of Famer. It doesn't. It's just like the standard is so low. Everybody
got in.
What's that?
Kukoc just got in. Rondo's not better than Tony Kukoc.
He was the first foreign, like the real big first foreign player.
Right. He also might have European accolades too.
There's a lot of stuff. Right. It goes European. It's the Naismith Hall of Fame, not the NBA one. Right. So it becomes that's how you get a lot of these international guys who've had okay careers in the NBA, but were phenomenal in Europe and Olympics and things like that. Like Melo's going to make it just on the strength of 4 Olympic gold medals. Like there's going to be that stuff. It wouldn't shock me, I should say, if Rondo makes the Hall of Fame. I probably wouldn't have him in my Hall of Fame.
He's not.
But it's just the way the NBA, I mean, Ben Wallace made it. Like everybody, the questions where it gets tough, like, does Iguodala make it just on the strength of the finals MVP?
No.
Like, does it, there's going to be a lot of those guys that make it. My problem with the NBA, with just the Hall of Fame is the standard is so low. It's just like when everybody's like, oh, somebody got nominated. I go like, okay, they'll make it. Yeah. Like, it's just, I'm shocked when you did it.
They need some of that leniency into baseball because baseball's the other way around. They're too stingy.
Yeah.
Hockey too. I mean, Pierre Turgeon, I was talking to Tyler about it. Pierre Turgeon has 540 something goals and 600 and some assists. He should be in the Hall of Fame. That's Hall of Fame numbers. He's not in the Hall of Fame. It doesn't make any sense how the NHL works on who goes to the Hall of Fame and who doesn't.
It's weird because they're the same way. The Hockey Hall of Fame is not just the NHL. It's all the same thing like we were saying with the NBA. It's
crazy.
Also international too.
It's crazy.
Yager could get in twice.
Yeah, right.
Also, Mo, I have another question for you. We look at the league and how it's transformed into a 3-point league, and now people are talking about, well, the 3-point line's too easy to shoot. Now, there were stories coming out that the NBA, I think it was a year ago, that the NBA was thinking about maybe making a 4-point line or a 5-point line because of distance shooting and making the game a little bit more fun to watch, which I think it's a clown game and it's a circus now, the way these guys shoot. You have Steph Curry shooting half court. Now all these guys, you have Trae Young doing it. You have all these guys doing it. Do you see the NBA adding a 4-point line, a 5-point line, or trying to transition the game and maybe pushing back the 3-point line to make it harder to shoot the 3?
I actually don't see it. I don't see that happening. And if you're looking at what's going on in the league right now, just the offense is coming down, right? Like offense has slowed down at the start of this season compared to last season and the year before. So it's, it all comes down to just how do you let the game be officiated? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the biggest change along those lines. It's, letting the guys actually play defense, putting their hands on these guys a little bit. They're getting away with a little bit more defensively with the holding and the grabbing and things that go with that. I don't think we're going to see an expansion of the 3-point line. I know somebody had talked about setting up the line so it gets rid of the corner 3 and things like that and everything that goes with it. I don't see the court dimensions changing. Mm-hmm. I think we're just going to stay with that. And I think it's just going to come down to how do we officiate the game? Because scoring went up because they got rid of the hand check. Right. And that was a product of that. If you brought the hand check back, just immediately scoring would drop on its own. Mm-hmm. But we're already seeing it now with the rules changes that the scoring has come down. And it's still early sample size. It's 7 or 8 games in for some of these teams. We'll see it at the end of the year. We can kind of just decide where the offense went. I think offense will get going better offensively as the year goes. But I just don't think that's not a concern to me. Like when they talk about that stuff, I just think, no, just stay with where we're at. The game itself, the court itself, is fine. It's us who screw it up in terms of how we officiate it, how we let the game be officiated.